welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here, and today we're going to be looking at the 2020 senatorial elections. We're going to look at the map and look what things have changed and where the races stand. Before we get started, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to get notified when I post my next video. So let's get started. So we're going to look at this map right now, and first thing that we're seeing is that we already have our safe states filled in, and this is a big thing for the Democrats. The Democrats have a 4-seat advantage when it comes to safe states, which is really good, as that gives them a little bit more ground, or less ground to make up. And, I mean, that's really good for them. And why are so many seats more safe states for the Democratic Party compared to what they were expected to perform? For a couple of reasons. Bad candidate choice on the part of the Republicans. Also, people upsets in some primaries that are going to affect some of these races, as well as some key issues that Democrats are just handling somewhat better. So we're going to look at all of that and more when you fill in the map. So let's get started by looking at our likely Democratic states. So right now, the Democrats have a somewhat solid hold on states like Arizona, Colorado, Michigan, Minnesota, and New Hampshire. Right now, this is what the map looks for the Democratic Party. At least 48 seats at this time, we can say, are in the likely column for them. So these races are all in the likely column for different reasons, but let's just see what they are. So in Arizona, we have Martha McSally, the current incumbent. She is a Republican, and she's running against Mark Kelly. He's a very, very strong candidate. He's the husband of former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who got fatally shot in an attack against her, and she survived, and she's a big gun control activist. And at this point, Mark Kelly is just overly popular. He's leading in a lot of polls, and consistently. Mark Kelly has been leading by 5, 6, 7, 8 points in some of these polls for a long period of time. And Martha McSally is not that popular. She was appointed to this seat. She wasn't even elected, so this is her first campaign, at least where she's trying to win, because she lost the 2018 Senate race against incumbent Senator Kirsten. So I think at this point, Mark Kelly has this race pretty much wrapped up, and it's not that contested, although Martha McSally could probably pull it off in a best case scenario. Out of the state of Colorado, we have for incumbent Senator Cory Gardner. Very unpopular person and very unpopular senator, just because he leans a lot more to the Republican Party, because he is a Republican in a state where more and more constantly the Democrats are gaining ground. There's many things that a lot of the voters are not happy for him, and you have someone like a former governor that's very popular, in John Hickenlooper. He's very popular, and he's challenging Cory Gardner in this race. And at this point in time, Cory Gardner has a somewhat large ability to lose in this race, just because John Hickenlooper is so popular, and at this point he's so unpopular. I think John Hickenlooper can easily win this race, maybe by around 5 to 8 points at this time, considering all the Democratic waves that are going to be felt on election day. Going on to the Midwest, in the state of Minnesota, we have Tina Smith going against, if I'm correct, it's Lewis, and I think at this point Tina Smith has this race wrapped up. She's very popular, and all these different things just come to show that she really doesn't need that much. She doesn't need that much to win here. And Tina Smith, I mean, she took over Al Franken's old seat, and I think at this point in time, she's going to be able to win here. And I mean, probably like 8 or 9 points, considering this state has been leaning somewhat more Democratic, even though there's been some areas that have been leaning more red, like this area of the state. However, I mean, I think at this point, Tina Smith is doing pretty well there. Michigan is a very interesting scenario, just because you have an incumbent Gary Peters, who is not super well known, but it's not like he's not known, and he's going against Republican challenger John James. John James is a person where he is a politician, and he's a black Republican. There's not too many of him, and he got pretty close of winning, at least in the Democratic seat standards in 2018, trying to beat Debbie Stepanow. She held on, and I think Gary Peters will also hold on. Right now, polling has Gary Peters ahead by 3, 4, 5, 6%, and I think it's going to fall a little bit more in the 5, 6% range at this time, and I think Gary Peters will probably win here by a likely margin. And out of the state of New Hampshire, Jean Shaheen is just doing exceptionally well. Latest polls have her ahead by 10, 13, 14, 15%, so we're nearing the top echelon of the likely margins. And I think at this point, Jean Shaheen is so popular, she won't have as much trouble winning this Senate race. So those are all our Democratic likely states. Let's move on to our Republican likely states at this time. So the Republican Party, they've been somewhat gaining more likely state, but also that's because they're losing likely seats as well in their columns that go from safe to likely, which is not good for them. And I feel at this time there's actually a lot of likely races for the Republican Party for many reasons. So we're going to start with the state of Alaska. This race is between incumbent U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan. He's going against independent/Democrat Al Gross. So I think at this point in time, this race is going to narrow down a bit just because of how Alaska is with its politics. There's a lot of third parties that are voting against Trump, and a lot of people see Dan Sullivan as a somewhat more pro-Trump Republican, although that might not necessarily be a fact. And I think at this point, Al Gross will probably do very well. He probably won't win, however, he would get close. I would say anywhere from the 7 to 8 point range victory for Al Gross in the state or for Dan Sullivan in the state of Alaska, pardon me. And going on to the next state, which is the state of Kansas. So this is one of the races where the primaries is what did it for the Democrats. So here, it was going to be a pretty contested race if Chris Kobach won the nomination. That did not end up happening. Roger Marshall, incumbent congressman, if I'm correct, from the 1st Congressional District in Kansas, he won that race. And in the nomination, now he's going against Barbara Bollier, state senator. And I think at this point, Barbara Bollier had a very high chance of winning against Chris Kobach. Although that has generally fallen out the window now that Roger Marshall's the nominee. However, I mean, a lot of these different things do change. However, I think the race will be somewhat narrowed down because I think there's a lot of excitement for her there. However, I think it won't be enough to push her over the edge against Roger Marshall. I think she's going to lose, and I think Roger Marshall will win by around maybe like eight points is where I think Roger Marshall could win at this time. Going on to the state of Texas, we have John Cornyn going against Mary Jane Hager. So MJ Hager is a Democrat, and Democrats are increasingly becoming more popular in the state of Texas. So I think that's one big thing to consider. And John Cornyn wasn't as popular, I guess, as Ted Cruz, because Ted Cruz was popular and his race got really close. However, we also must think about the fact that MJ Hager is not Beto O'Rourke when it comes to campaigning and all these different things. So I think, honestly, at this point in time, John Cornyn's probably going to carry the race in the state of Texas by around 5 points, I would say. And I mean, that's a good margin for him, considering how close this state is becoming. Again, I don't see MJ Hager going and winning by the margins that Beto O'Rourke did in 2018. Or actually, not winning because he lost, but narrowing the race to those margins. So that's the state of Texas. Going on to the state of Mississippi, this race is interesting because we have incumbent U.S. Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith going against Mike Epps. This is a rematch of the special election when Cindy Hyde-Smith first got elected. So essentially what happened is that that race got close because Mike Epps is an African-American, and since there is somewhat going to be a lot more turnout for African-Americans, Mike Epps might get within, I would say, maybe 8 points from the Senate race. However, I think Cindy Hyde-Smith will still win with the Republican base in the state of Mississippi by around 8 to 15 points, anywhere in the upper echelon of likely margins. Going on to the state of Alabama, this is a flip at this time for the Republicans, I would say at this time. And why? So this race we have incumbent U.S. Senator Doug Jones. He is a Democrat, and he won his race because the candidate they ran was a very flawed candidate. And I think at this time around, they ran someone that's pretty popular across the state just because of how big of a figure the Republican candidate, Tommy Tuberville, is. And I think at this point, Doug Jones doesn't have any big troubles. She's probably going to lose, however. He's not going to have big trouble, like, going back to the margins that the Democrats were before, but I think he will still carry a somewhat large amount of Democratic and Republican vote because he's actually pretty popular for a Democrat in the state of Alabama. And I mean, Doug Jones was a very good candidate for the Democrats to run when that was the special election. However, I mean, that's kind of all gone out the window now that there's a more popular Republican running against him. So I think Tommy Tuberville will win election by around maybe 5 to 8 points on the lower echelon of likely margins. Going on to the next state, this is the state of South Carolina. We have Lindsey Graham. He's kind of part of the GOP establishment. He's been there for 10,000 years. And he's going against Jamie Harrison, so very interesting candidate indeed. So what's going on in this race? We have a state where minorities are somewhat large, especially when it comes at least to African Americans. I know there's somewhat of a Mexican population in parts of South Carolina. And at this point in time, I would say that Jamie Harrison could get closer to flipping the state. However, it's not going to be completely there. Lindsey Graham is like Mitch McConnell. He has support because he is the establishment. So I think at this point in time, I think that Lindsey Graham will probably win here by around 8 to 9 points. However, very good achievement for the Democrats as they get closer in the state of South Carolina due to its trending demographics, and especially since there's probably going to be high African American turnout. Very good for the Democratic Party. Now, the last state for the Republicans in the likely column is the state of Kentucky. This is the race between Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Amy McGrath, former fighter pilot. So, I think this race was going to be a lot more contested maybe a couple weeks ago, but I think a lot of the people in Kentucky are they're mad at Mitch McConnell because he's been there for, again, 15,000 years. But I think also Amy McGrath, I think a lot of the voters don't like her as much. I think, honestly, this race could have been somewhat closer, but I think Amy McGrath is not as popular as people might have thought that she was. However, Mitch McConnell still has a group of people that are against him because he's been in power for so long, and some of the Kentucky voters don't like that. And essentially, we've seen this for a very long time, where essentially Mitch McConnell has been there for a long time, and he's part of the GOP establishment. He's the head in the Senate. So I think that Mitch McConnell's honestly going to have somewhat of a tough race, but he always has tough re-election races. 2014 was pretty tough for him. If I'm correct as well, 2008 was pretty tough for him. So these things constantly are changing, and things are definitely a little harder for Mitch McConnell this time around, just because, I guess, Amy McGrath is a candidate that appeals not only to Democrats, but to moderate Republicans, which are a key group of voters in the state of Kentucky. So those are all our likely states for the Republican Party, and we're going to move on now to the lean states for the Democratic Party. At this point in time, the Democrats have somewhat of an advantage when it comes to two races, and I think they're going to win by lean margins at this time: North Carolina and Maine. So these are two races where you essentially have unpopular incumbents, and you have very strong challengers on the Democratic side. North Carolina, we have Cal Cunningham. He's running against Tom Tillis. Tom Tillis, not the most popular person, to say the least, and Cal Cunningham is having a lot of momentum in the state. He's going in and campaigning with the minorities and the groups of voters that he does need, and he's raising a big amount of money, which is going to be crucial if he wants to win this race. Polling data has him ahead by around 3 to 5%, and I think that's where the race is going to fall, 3 to 5% margin. Possibly, I think it could be somewhat closer, maybe 2, I would say more in the range of 2 to 5%. However, I think it would be more in the 2, 3, maybe that amount of margin for Cal Cunningham in the state of North Carolina. Again, major flip for the Democratic Party, and that inches them closer to taking the majority of the United States Senate. And the state of Maine, again, very interesting race. I think at this point in time, Susan Collins is going to lose just because she is so unpopular. She was once the most popular senator in the United States, and her being her losing her election or re-election was kind of unheard of because she was so popular. Not anymore. Now that she's starting to side more with the Republican Party more, and she is a Republican, but she used to be more bipartisan in a state where they like bipartisanship. So, I mean, at this point, Susan Collins is going to have a tough race to win. I think it's going to be somewhat close, considering that this is a Democratic seat, or at least a state that has been trending Democratic. However, I honestly feel like Sarah Gideon is probably going to pull it out. Again, Sarah Gideon has been leading in polling and in recent fundraising numbers. So that's a very good sign for Sarah Gideon and her campaign. I think she's going to win by around 2 to 5 points. Similar margins, I would say, in this, similar to the state of North Carolina. So that's going to be interesting to watch. So those are our two lean Democratic races, and let's go on to the two Republican lean races, and those are the state of Georgia and both of their Senate races. So this Senate race is very interesting. You have two interesting races one will be easier to predict than the other, and for good reasons. So the easiest one to predict will definitely be Georgia's regular Senate election that we have, that was scheduled for this year anyways, and that is between David Perdue and Jon Ossoff. David Perdue is not the most popular politician in Georgia. However, I mean, Jon Ossoff has a lot of support. So what do I think is going to happen here? I think David Perdue will carry the state of Georgia probably by 3 to 5%. And the reason I think he's going to win there is because he is able to bring a lot of the suburban Georgians to go vote for him, especially in the Atlanta suburbs, which is important for him. And I think what has really made the state of Georgia kind of be a little bit more solidly Republican, it's the suburbs. The suburbs haven't flipped as quickly as they have in other states. So I think at this point, David Perdue has it kind of wrapped up in that race. Jon Ossoff is a good candidate. However, I think he's running for the wrong race. He should have ran in the other Senate race. However, I mean, he could get closer at least and bringing up the margins in areas like downtown Atlanta and Macon and all those bigger Democratic strongholds in Georgia. Now, the more hard race to predict at this time, I would say, is the special Senate election in Georgia, because it's a jungle primary. For those of you that do not know what a jungle primary is, it is essentially when there's going to be unlimited amount of candidates can run on the ballot, and the top 2 candidates essentially go to a runoff if no one hits 50%, which again, considering how big this race is, it's probably going to go to a runoff. So in latest polling for this race, we have Kelly Loeffler, incumbent U.S. Senator. She's been leading in some of the recent polling, although Doug Collins, also incumbent U.S. House of Representatives member, he was leading for the longest of time. And then on the Democratic side, you don't have too much of like interesting, very exciting candidates running. So I mean, you have Raphael Warnock, who is the favorite right now. If the Democrats do end up getting a second place slot in the state of Georgia's special Senate election, he's probably going to be Raphael Warnock against Collins or Loeffler. And right now, the polling data has Loeffler and Doug Collins in the first and second place slot, which, if that ends up happening, that kind of squashes the Democrats' chances at this Senate seat. And I think at this point, who's the most likely to win? I would say that Loeffler has somewhat of a high chance, but again, Doug Collins is not as hated as Loeffler, because what I've heard is that Loeffler is not that popular in the state of Georgia, because she was also appointed. So that's going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening. But however, I mean, this race is going to be a little harder to predict, and we'll have more information about it once we know who the 2 people going on to the runoff election are. So there are all our lean Republican races, essentially the state of Georgia, and our current map is 48 Republicans to 50 Democrats. As we move into our tilt races, and kind of the deciding factor, if the Republicans are able to win these 2 races, it would be a 50-50 Senate, and if the Democrats can win one, they have the outright majority without Joe Biden winning. And then if it's a 50-50 Senate, again, it would go down to the vice presidency. Right now, I have a feeling that in Montana, I think that Steve Bullock, incumbent governor, he's very popular, will narrowly beat out incumbent U.S. Senator Steve Daines. I think at this point in time, it's pretty safe to say that this race is going to be one of the closest, if not the closest, for many reasons. One, this race reminds me a little bit of the Florida Senate race in 2018, just for the fact that a popular governor is going to be going against a not well-known senator. So this state is trending Democratic, certainly, and I'm going to say the following. I think that Steve Daines will probably almost narrowly lose. His fundraising numbers aren't great. However, I mean, and Steve Bullock is so popular, so all the incumbency and all those all the different number of advantages that Steve Daines might have had that kind of been flushed down the toilet. Now that Steve Bullock is running, and I think Steve Bullock is probably going to not easily, but he's going to narrowly push out this race. Very good for the Democrats. That gives them the majority, essentially, and I think Steve Bullock will pull it out there. But when it comes to Iowa's Senate race, I think that Joni Ernst will narrowly push it out in this race. Why do I think that? One, I think that honestly, at this point in time, Joni Ernst, although she might be somewhat unpopular, she still does have the base with the rural voters in the state of Iowa, which is a big part of the electorate in this state. Where does her opponent, Teresa Greenfield, come in? Well, she comes in because there is a lot of suburbs that have started to flip, and we can see that, for example, in the 1st Congressional District represented by Abby Finkenauer, where you have a lot of more voters that are trending more to Democrats, and these areas that used to be solidly Republican are trending more blue. So, I mean, at this point in time, it's going to be a little hard to see what ends up happening here. However, I think with latest polling that has Joni Ernst narrowly ahead, and I think just general support for Joni Ernst, that she does have a solidified base that she knows they're going to come out for her. I think Joni Ernst should be able to win here. And even in a race where, in Iowa, a statewide race where the Democrats ran a very strong candidate, and against a somewhat more unpopular incumbent, they still lost. So I think Joni Ernst will probably push it out by a tilt margin, narrowly beating out Teresa Greenfield. And that is the last state in our prediction. And I think the Democrats will take control of the Senate, 51-49. A very good margin of victory. I mean, at this point, their Senate map wasn't looking too good if we were to look at it last year. But with COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, and different events nationwide, I think the map is looking a lot more better, or better for the Democratic Party. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. So please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to get notified when I post my next video. Hope you enjoyed the good video, and goodbye.